Hi folks, Rory here. Today's video is going to be my thoughts on acrylic paint pens and their uses for work on some Napoleonic figures. I picked up some Retail 0.7 millimeter tip pens from the internet, and I've given them a go on some Perry French Napoleonics and great coats. I've given these a prime of Colour Forge Ghoul Grey, which is a nice light grey, and I'm going to leave the great coats in this colour. The main reason I wanted to test these was to see if it speeds up the painting process, and colour primers are very good for quickly taking care of the largest surface area on a model, in this case the great coat. Now, the box that I got didn't have a great skin colour, or Caucasian skin colour anyhow, so there's a sort of off-white. Now what we'll find with these pens is that the coverage is a bit uneven, and it will need a couple of coats of the lighter ones to work. The tips, even though they're 0.7 millimeters, there's still quite a bulk of nib there, and it means getting into harder to reach places is a bit tricky. I'll see more of that as I do some other colours later. One thing that they're not so great at is when you've got a large surface area to cover. I think colouring in the oilskin wrapping on the shackle here would be quicker if I had a brush with black paint. And the other thing as well is that because of the width of this nib, I can't fit it into the space between the musket and the side of the shackle there. Other places it gets a bit tricky, sort of up underneath the pack when doing the cartridge box, and a bayonet sheath as well, tricky to get to. Another issue when colouring in the pom-pom is that it's impossible to get the nib into the underside of the ball. The recess there just doesn't let the nib in, so left with a bit of the undercoat showing. So certainly a couple of negatives there about the nib size. Upside perhaps is that things with straight flat surfaces like this musket are really quick to do. And even the pack has the rough textured surface, but there is enough flow in the paint to just work its way into the recesses. You're not just left colouring in the raised parts. And for fine details, like this cord that the water bottle is on, that gets picked out quite easily when it's nicely sculpted on the figure there. The white doesn't have great coverage. We'll need a couple of coats. However, it is relatively straightforward to pick out raised surfaces like the straps where they've been sculpted on. For colouring in the larger areas, like the trousers that are showing, it's going to take about as long as a brush, possibly even a wee bit longer, because we have to work it into the recesses. Things like straps on the backpack, nice and straightforward with the pen. think one of the real strengths of the acrylic pens, though, is for doing metallic areas such as weapons. It's really quick to follow nice straight lines on a musket, or indeed dabbing a button. This feels much more accurate than when you would do the same with a paintbrush. But like any model, in order to bring out some of the detail, create some shading, we'll need to put a wash on. So I've got some Army Painter Strong Tone in a 1:1 ratio with quick shade mixing medium. I'll give the whole model a coat of this. Okay, with the wash done, you can see that the flesh colour wasn't very good. I will sort that out probably with some contrast paint over the top. But on to highlighting. The great coat I will highlight with some paint. I think Vallejo Game Colour Stonewall Grey will work well on that. But we can bring the pens back in, the white here, and it can make for a really quick touch up to highlight. So highlight the area on the shako where some of the brown paint that was used on the musket has got onto it because the gap was too small. I'll need to cover that over with a brush on paint. We can do a really easy highlight along the peak of the shako with a grey. And of course around the rim as well. Cartridge box, and then perhaps on the tips of the toes of the boots as well. So I've done the brush acrylic paint highlights and added some contrast paint to the skin, and here is our man along with some of his buddies ready to go join a light infantry regiment that's underway. They've all been done in the same manner. So overall, Ratel acrylic painter pens. I think that trying to do a whole model is probably a bit foolish. I already knew that I wanted the main colour done with the spray primer, and it would have taken a very long time to paint a great coat with one of the pens, and I think it would have taken longer than a brush equivalent. Same is true of areas like the shako, and that was sort of even more complicated because of the lack of space for the nib. It may well be that you can get finer than 0.7 millimeters, but I still think just the bulk of the pen itself might make it difficult to get into hard to reach areas. Good points then. I think that doing metallics, when you've got a nice straight line like on a musket, really simple, quick and easy. For highlighting colours, when you've got a nice raised sculpted surface, it's very simple to take the pen and do a quick line highlight. You are perhaps limited to a certain thickness of highlight. It is quite chunky in comparison to perhaps using a 0 brush or a 00. The colour range is not ideal in this set for human figures in Napoleonic uniforms. I don't think well, there isn't a Caucasian skin colour. There was just that off-white. I could have gone for a pink, which might have worked with a wash or contrast paint over the top, as well as the off-white that I used. But as a colour straight out the nib of the pen, there isn't one in this set. Other sets may vary. Though, upsides. Ergonomically, it's easier to hold a pen than a brush. A bit wider. The nib is firmer than brush bristles, so you're getting a bit of feedback when you touch the surface. So it's easier to control where your paint ends up. There's no loading up of palettes, there's no needing to wash the brush afterwards, and you've got a consistent flow of paint on the brush. You're not going to run the risk of having too little or too much as you can do with a brush. So will these replace acrylic paints and brushes for me? Not at all. Will I use them from time to time perhaps for highlights and metallics? Yes, I think they will be useful for that. Another use of them, which I haven't demonstrated here, is if you were to be doing any writing. You know, if you wanted some graffiti, perhaps on a World War II tank or on terrain, it's much easier to write with the acrylic paint pen than it is to try and do that with a brush. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, something a bit different, and I may well have more models done partly with the pens to show off in future. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.